let me start by introducing our guest today, who's so kindly given us his time. So, Rahul Soni is Associate Publisher at HarperCollins India, where he has published a number of award winning authors from Avni Doshi to Vinod Kumar Shukla, from Arshia Sattar to Madhuri Vijay, from Janice Parya to S. Harish. As a translator, his publications include a selection of Ashok Vajpayee's poetry, A Name for Every Leaf, Pankaj Kapoor's novella Dopehri, Shrikant Verma's Sahitya Academy award-winning poetry collection, Magad, and International Booker Prize winner Gitanjali Shree's novel The Roof Beneath Their Feet. So welcome, Rahul. Thank you for giving us your time, your precious time.
Thank you for having me.
This was a very condensed version of your bio. I was going through your website and there's so much more that you do. So can you tell us a little bit more that's not there on your official restricted condensed bio?
Uh, well, I've had a weird trajectory through my uh, working life. I started out not knowing what to do, as many of us, I'm sure, do, and kind of wandered around for 10 years, figuring out what I really wanted to do. Uh, and then I met another fellow unpublished writer, uh, and well, we thought to ourselves, how do we go about uh, infiltrating the circuit, as it were? And so we thought the best way to do it was to start a magazine. And so we started a magazine, and this was in 2008. It was called Pratilipi, and it was, I think, at that point, one of the earliest multilingual magazines around. Uh, and yeah, I think that is what properly began my career around publishing. I've done a lot of things, from ghostwriting to designing covers to typesetting to proofreading to translating to on and on. Run residencies, and now I am in what is actually my first ever job, and possibly the only job I will have, which is HarperCollins. I've been handling the literary list for the last 6.5 years now, and that's where I've published all these names that you mentioned, um, among many others. I'm approaching my 100th book as publisher as we speak. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, that is a condensed, again, version of things.
Yeah. So Pratilipi, I found Pratilipi quite interesting. I think I was telling you I got
Mhm.
distracted by Pratilipi in between. And one of the things that I noticed on the website that you've published more than 400 writers from more than 30 languages across the world. So I'm really curious, how do you go about, because you as a person may know 3 languages, 4 languages. So how do you go about
Yeah, three and
managing
a half, yes.
coming up with the founding it, then running it, and encouraging people in 30 languages? So where does this
Well,
interest come from?
my friend was a Hindi writer. I wrote in English, and so we had those two languages between us, where we had literary competence, let's say. Uh, and so it started out being bilingual. But of course, we realized very quickly that if you're running a literary journal in India, you can't limit yourself to Hindi and English. You need to spread out more. And so we involved more and more people in the project, readers that we trust, writers whose taste we have come to appreciate, um, and who were also very generous with their advice, with their contacts, with pointing us to the right places. Um, so if you looked at the Pratilipi website, if it's still up, I don't even know if it's still up.
It's still up. It's still up.
Um, there's a list of I think people who we called our consultants or language consultants, and there's a fair few of those. But ultimately, of course, I mean, it does come down to how a story or a poem or text reads in the language that you read, right? The language that we are publishing it in, which would be primarily Hindi or English, along with the original text. And so that was what we ultimately had to decide. That's what we based our decisions on. And literary quality, of course, carries through. If it's a good translation, it does carry through.
Okay. Talking about translation, of course, this is one of the major focus of our FDC this time.
Mm-hmm.
So what got you really interested into translation, and can you tell us about your journey, how it started and how you went about it?
Well, it was partly Pratilipi itself, and the fact that I was at that time hanging around with a writer who wrote in Hindi and who was very well versed in the literature in Hindi. So for Pratilipi, of course, we used to translate between Hindi and English, both of us, and that was just a matter of simple expediency. But my co-editor, he pointed me to this volume of poems by Shrikant Verma called Magad, and he thought I'd really, really like it, and he was completely correct. And it kind of resonated with what I was trying to do as a writer in English. Some of the themes, the tone of voice, the quality of voice it had. And so I thought I should do this in English. I need to figure out how this works. So to learn how to kind of capture that tone, I started creating those poems in English, as it were. I did not think of it as translation, really. It was just an exercise. And it took way longer than I realized. I kept at it on and off for almost 5 years before I was close to satisfied with what I had managed to create. And yeah, and then of course there were other texts and other reasons for doing them.
So, for somebody who is new to translation and is good in two languages and is maybe considering a career in it, how does it work in the industry? Do they have to wait to get a commission from a publisher, or can they just have something ready and pitch it to the publishers?
It can work both ways. If you're starting out, I think it's always good to have a sample of your work, and a substantial sample, if not the entire manuscript. Editors who acquire fiction typically tend to want to read the whole manuscript. It's not like nonfiction where you can, on the basis of an idea, kind of acquire a book, or on the basis of a person's uh, standing in the industry or their celebrity, acquire a book and say, okay, this is going to work and we'll make it happen. For fiction or for poetry, you need to know what you're working with. You need to know how it goes from beginning to end. So yeah, especially if you're starting out, I would suggest just doing it on spec, as it were. Make sure you have the author's permission. Although you also need the original language publisher on board if you're translating. But yeah, if you have the author on your side and you've plunged in, I think just do as much of the text as you can, polish it, really, really polish it to a high level before sending it out. No one wants to read your first draft.
Okay. So, coming back to you, I read an article somewhere there where you had been quoted as saying that I find constraints of the original text liberating to work with. Really, can you elaborate on that? How can any constraint be liberating?
Uh, I think in the same piece I'd spoken about Oulipo writers who work with these very, very specific constraints. Like, for instance, writing a novel without the letter E, or I think those are called lipograms, leaving out important bits of syntax or letters or just pieces of vocabulary, and working with those constraints. And they kind of push your brain into various interesting directions if you are not allowed to do certain things that you would naturally reach for. Um, but I don't know. I think I'd like to revise that. That's not an analogy that is working well in my mind anymore. Uh, I think what it does, translation maybe, is it allows you to focus on the craft more than anything else. You are kind of you don't need to. You're liberated from the need to have something to say or a story to tell. You can focus purely on craft, on capturing tone, on uh, figuring out the best way to convey a certain effect to the reader. Um, and that, I think, is something great and something every writer should try out. Whether they publish translations or not, it's a very valuable exercise as you develop your craft, I think, just to find different ways to do things, and take on different voices.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. It to me, when I was listening to you, it felt like, I was constantly thinking about coal into turning into diamond, because you are putting a certain pressure on yourself to perform within the boundaries, and it somehow can make you do better.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it might be diamond sometimes. It's often just coal dust, or yeah. Um, yeah, but yeah, there's no obligation to show people everything that you produce.
talking about constraints, to someone like me, it feels like translating poetry must be comparatively more difficult than fiction, because poetry comes with its own set of rules that you have to adhere to, aside from the text and the constraints of translation. What is your experience? You have done both.
I actually, I mean, I don't know if I can speak about the difficult, compare the difficulty. Well-written prose or well-written verse, they all have, I mean, they have similar qualities. They work with language, they work with syntax, they work with tone, they work with voice. They push the language in various directions, in uncomfortable directions also sometimes. Um, Again, I'm talking about well-written work. So, I mean, apart from that, I think in verse, it becomes more obvious in verse, because just it's the format that kind of highlights these choices much more. Um, I actually find verse easier in some ways, because poems are often far shorter, uh, and the unit, often the line, is also a much shorter unit that you're working with. Whereas with a novel, you have to often stay in one voice for really, really long stretches, and that I find is kind of tiring. Um, so with a poem, you can kind of get in and get out in a far shorter period of time, um, and then plunge in again a few days later, maybe, to kind of fine tune it. But with prose, you have to stick to that one voice. It's like long distance running as opposed to like maybe short sprints. They both have their little difficulties, and different ones, maybe slightly.
Okay. uh, it's really interesting. I'll just take a moment here to our participants. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments, and once around in some time, we'll take your questions from the comments. Yeah. So as and when you think of questions, feel free to put them in the comments section. So coming back to a little bit back to your experience with Pratilipi, and also I see that you have been, part of associated with Asymptote, the International Journal of Translation. So, what are some of the tips that you would give to the audience before submitting translated works to such journals? Okay, I think Rahul has dropped off. I'll just check with him. Give me a minute.
Hi, I
Yeah,
think I'm back.
welcome back. I
Yeah,
was
so yeah, I lost connection for a second.
okay.
Um,
So, I don't know whether you got the question. Shall I repeat
no, I
it?
did not. Yes, please repeat it if you
So,
can.
yeah, so I just went back a little back to when we were discussing about your Pratilipi journal, literary
Mhm.
journal, and you have also been associated with Asymptote, the
Yeah.
International Journal of Translation. So, with your experience, what tips would you give to our audience here today for submitting translated works to journals?
Um, well, very basic things, of course. Well, first, take a good look at the journal and see what kind of work they publish. Um, and yeah, the second would then be just submit a really well polished draft, work on it multiple times, do at least 5, 6 drafts before you send it around. You don't get too many shots at this sort of thing, right? So yeah, you better make it count when you do send it out. Make sure if it's a translation, permissions are in place. You have the okay of the author or the publishing house or the estate, as the case may be. Um, yeah, I think that would be it.
Okay. So, you're also currently the associate publisher at HarperCollins. Can you share what kind of translation titles do well in the market and what kind of manuscript publishers are usually looking for?
Um, okay, so as I said, I handle the literary publishing at Harper. Um, Literary publishing in English in India is a very, 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 very niche area. Um, Nothing does well. Short answer. Um, um, the average sales for a literary work, whether it's in English originally or whether it's a translation from other languages into English, would be in the region of about 2,000 copies. If you're lucky, it might hit 5,000. If you're that rare creature who maybe, yeah, we come across maybe one of them every year, perhaps at best, it crosses 10,000. And in my experience, 10,000 is the upper limit, absolute upper limit of literary readers in English in India. Beyond that, I mean, if a work sells beyond that, it's basically because people who don't typically read are finding out about the book and getting curious. And those are typically books by, say, someone like Amitav Ghosh or Arundhati Roy, people who are pretty much celebrities and are in the news for various reasons. Um, so, yeah, with that background in mind and knowing that literary writing is that sort of niche, what are publishing houses looking for? Um, Again, I will not presume to speak for other publishing houses. What I try to look for is something that's bringing new stories and new voices into the to the readership rather. Um, I mean, again, because English writing is such a niche thing, and given our socio-political context, it's also a very privileged space, reading and writing in English. The stories that get written in English tend to also be very urban, very privileged, stories of very privileged people. Um, so what I look for is work that brings voices from outside these zones. Um, and say a work like Mustache by S. Harish, which brings a very particular kind of Kerala experience to light. And because it is so specific and rooted to place, it also manages to, I think, bridge and cross other contexts and become this universal sort of book that interrogates masculinity and the caste experience in India, which is relevant everywhere. What I look for is voices that are new, that are different, that are telling stories that we don't get to hear, or works that are pushing the language or the form of the novel more. With the perennial imprint, which is the translation imprint at Harper, the attempt has been for me to focus on works that are more contemporary, because Penguin has already kind of cornered the classics market. So how do we kind of create an identity for our translations imprint? And we decided we'd focus on modern writing from across India.
Mm-hmm.
The novel, and I haven't been able to figure this one out, but conventional wisdom is unfortunately right on this, is novels do tend to sell more than short stories for some bizarre reason. And so we do have more novels, but I'm trying to publish a fair few short story collections as well. Poetry, again, very, very predictably, does not sell beyond, say, 1,000 copies. If you're really, really lucky, it will go into a second print run after that. But it's supremely rare.
Okay.
Unless you're Rupi Kaur.
Okay. So, can we talk about some of your own projects? Do you have a favorite child?
That's a horrible question. I don't think you're supposed to ask that.
That's why we keep asking that.
Certainly not in public.
Okay. Still,
Yeah,
some of the
there's
book that some book that has, aside from the translating itself, something that has left some, memory that you have fond memories about.
there's there's a number of books that I'm very happy about for different reasons. For instance, Madhuri Vijay's The Far Field, because well, no one else was willing to publish it in India. And we did stick our necks out and go ahead and do it, and did really, really well for us and reached out to many, many readers. Or there is Avni Doshi's novel, Girl in White Cotton, which subsequently got published as Burnt Sugar in the UK and went on to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize and so on. Or there is the work of this Bengali writer, Shubhimal Mishra, which is very, very radical, very experimental, radical in its politics and in its form. And that's something I'm kind of proud of having pushed through the corporate mainstream trade publishing system. Those are a few that come to mind immediately, I'd say.
The last one I can totally relate to. I'm a Bong. I've read the book, so I totally understand. But I kept waiting for you to tell me about Gitanjali Shri's The Roof Beneath Their Feet and Pankaj Kapoor's Dopehri.
Well, yes.
Any insights
Yeah,
you need to
those
know?
are books that I've translated. Dopehri, of course, I've published as well. Um, and yeah, that was a slightly awkward situation because I mean, ideally, I'd not like to commission myself to publish things under my imprint. Um, uh, but that's what we had to go for because, well, for Pankajji, we had asked for a bunch of samples, and he wasn't quite satisfied with any. Neither was I. But in my conversations with him, I could tell what he was looking for, and I also had this idea of what this translated book should sound like. And so I figured it would be easiest if I just did it myself, and also just that would cut out one link from the whole chain of communication and coordination that we would need to. It was also a very short book, about 20,000 words or less. So yeah, I realized I could make space for that despite my day job. Um, but he was very surprisingly, I would admit, good to work with. Um, he's not a writer in English, but he is a great actor, as many of you will know. And as an actor, he has a great sense for the oral and oral qualities of the language. And that feeling for sound is something that he was constantly there to kind of nudge me and guide me on, even in the translation. And I think it made for a better work in the end. Gitanjali Shri's book that happened about the same time, or that got published at about the same time as Magad did in 2013, and got reissued at the same time as Magad got reissued last year. Um, and that was, of course, way before many people in English reading circles had heard of Gitanjali Shri. Um, but she was always a very interesting writer, trying out new things with the language, with the form. And so, and I knew her because of Pratilipi. And so we'd got talking and we'd said, okay, let's try this thing where you translate. And that's when HarperCollins, where I was not working at that point, where Meenakshi Thakur, my predecessor, was, she signed us up. And it was really difficult. Magad was very minimal poetry. This was a very maximalist kind of prose. It took me many, many months to get the first paragraph right, to get the voice right in that first paragraph. But when I was able to hit that note, then the rest of it, I think, flowed much, much easier. And then, of course, I got a chance to revise it a little when we were doing the new edition. But yeah, it's much more accessible work than Tomb of Sand. It's much shorter. That helps. And it's about this friendship between these two women and their nephew who's kind of stuck in the middle. But yeah, I think I appreciated it even more when I read it this time around. I may have been a bit young and arrogant when I first took that project on.
I love it how you are kind of being a little bit self-deprecating about it, but you have done so much already, so not really working on us. Can you give us some must-read recommendations that'll, help understand the Indian literary translation landscape?
Hmm. must-read translations. Well, Subimal Mishra, V. Ramaswamy, I think, is one of our finest translators, and he picks out like very, very interesting, very important texts as well. So I'd suggest looking at his entire oeuvre, whether it's Manoranjan Vyapari or Shahidul Zahir or Subimal Mishra or anything else Ramaswamy decides to translate, I will read. Likewise, Jayashree Kalatil, who translates from Malayalam. She's done Mustache, she's done Valli. I just published last month a new translation from her, which is called Maria, just Maria. It's a shorter novel than the others. It's by a first-time writer called Sandhya Mary. And it's very unusual sort of work, especially in Malayalam, where we've kind of got used to this large-scale, sweeping, magic realist kind of narratives lately. This is a more compact book about, well, I shouldn't say about mental health, but it does deal with mental health as well.
That's definitely going on to my TBR. Anything else?
Vinod Kumar Shukla, especially the book called Blue is Like Blue, which Arvind Krishna Mehrotra and Sara Rai translated.
Okay.
What else? I would say read Magad. It's my translation of Shrikant Verma's book of poems, and I think it's very, very relevant in the times we're living through right now. There's so much more. I mean, I'll point you to translators I really admire. Two of them I've named, Ramaswamy, one, Jayashree Kalatil, the other, Srinath Perur. He's someone to look out for. Mani Rao, who translates from Sanskrit. And she's done these really accessible yet quite radical translations of classic texts like the Gita, for instance, or Saundarya Lahari, or Kalidasa even. Arshia Sattar, whose translation of the Ramayana is, I think, the translation to read. Who else? Yeah, that should be a fair bit of reading to get you started on translations, I think.
Okay. One last question before I go to our audience questions. Like, what are the opportunities out there for translators right now? Like, especially Hindi to English or English to Hindi translators these days.
The translation is famously underpaid. And hard to make a career out of. Writing, in any case, in India is something that's really, really hard to make a career out of. So I would say go into it if only for the love of it. If you're really, really passionate about text, if you're really, really passionate about your writing, about the idea of translating. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, there are more quote unquote productive ways, I guess, to spend your time. There's, I know that non-literary translations, technical translations for say in say the NGO space or for governmental organizations, they pay a fair bit higher, but that's also kind of drudge work. I'm guessing it's not as exciting as literary translation. There's work like subtitling. I have no idea about what that entails or what that means career-wise, how one goes about that. So I don't know if I can speak about that. But yeah, just speaking of literary translation, it's not a career. I mean, yeah, if you love it, go for it. Academics might be a space where you can kind of make space, create a zone for yourself here. Um, yeah.
Okay, so we'll start taking audience questions.
Mhm.
First, we have Preeti Prakash who wants to know, whose question is, can you talk a little bit about the value an agent adds and how do you go about choosing the right one at this and at what stage should you sign them? And how does the relationship with an editor, author, and agent work, the synergies between these roles?
I would always recommend going with an agent rather than without, but you have to be, and that's the key question you have there, right? How do you go about choosing the right agent? Um, I would approach them at the same stage as you would think of approaching a publisher, which is when you have a manuscript that you feel is ready and in shape to be shown around. Do not go to a publisher, approach a couple of agents. There are not too many major ones in India. It's still a small field. Um, Writer's side, Kanishka Gupta, that's one of the major ones. There are also Siahi, Jacaranda, there's Shruti Devi, there is
Yeah, we
a
actually have,
suitable agency.
yeah, we actually have a blog post on our website. You can take a look. It's a list of all the major literary agents. You
Yeah.
can take a look at them.
Um, I think how you choose them would be based on a conversation. I think once you send them the work, wait for them to respond. If they do get back with interest, have a chat with them, see what they are kind of envisioning for the work, whether you are on board with uh, their vision of it, um, whether they're not going to be forcing you into spaces that you're uncomfortable with for your work. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's going to be a working relationship, so you should be comfortable with the people you're working with more than anything else, and you should be able to trust them. So that is something you'll only be able to gauge once you've had a conversation or two.
Mhm.
Um, most publishers are very used to working with and through agents, so that doesn't really change the equations or dynamics there at all. Once the book is acquired, you will be dealing with the editor and the publishing house. Agents typically do not uh, have too much of an editorial input after a certain stage, after submission's been made and the manuscript's been signed on. It's typically the publishing house who will be uh, doing most of the work on the manuscript. And so it will primarily be an editor author interaction rather than an agent.
Okay. So Varun is asking what are literary agents looking for in fiction novels?
Um, that you might have to ask literary agents. My sense is they're looking for anything they can sell. Um,
Yeah. Shayani has a question. She's been really enjoying our session today. I can see her smiling from time to time. So, for poetry, how do you work with the form? Do you stick to the same form in the original text and similar rhythm, sounds, and rhyme schemes? If you could elaborate on that, thank you.
as a translator, I'm guessing you mean. Um,
Yes, yes,
I
she.
think I think different texts require different solutions. With Magad, for instance, I was able to stick very close to the shape and form of the original Hindi poems. Um, if you give me a second, I'll just pull down a copy of the book.
Okay.
Okay. Not sure how visible this might be, but
Quite visible.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this would, so this is the older edition, which was bilingual. And there, and partly also because it was bilingual, I went the extra mile to kind of have them match up visually. But it was easy to do, I think, because of the nature of the poems themselves. Um, I've been on and off working on translations of Mirabai's verses, and those are typically uh, in the form of what are called pad, and very compact 5 or 6 or 8 line poems, very densely packed little squares of text. Um, and I found that when I was doing that in English, it did not work. Somehow the brevity of the original was not coming through if I was keeping those lines as they were in the original. So what I did there was I broke each line into a separate stanza in English and made them like really, really short lines of 1 or 2 words, one stanza to a line of the original. And that I felt somehow did convey the compactness of the original in a more effective manner than if I stuck closely to the visual shape of the poem in the original. Things like rhyme, you're not going to be able to do. You'll have to figure out different ways to get the rhythms and the music of the original into. Too much rhyme in English sounds often forced, sounds juvenile even. And yeah, unless that's the sound of the original, you don't want that here. With Magad, for instance, I did a lot of repetition. I used a lot of repetition to kind of replicate those effects and to create those rhymes where I needed to.
Okay.
Can you tell me what you mean by repetition?
Sorry, I think I will read out a poem to give you an idea of, or a bit of a poem to give you an idea of what I mean. It's always easier to talk about specifics than generalize rules for writing or translation, because there are no rules, right? So there's a poem in Magad called Dharm Yudh, which I translated as a just war. And the final passage in the poem goes, एक तरफा होती है हत्या, एक तरफा जय, एक तरफा दर्प, एक तरफा भय, एक तरफा विधवाएं, एक तरफा सधवाएं, and so on. So you can see that there's both the repetition of ek tarfa on one side, and there is the rhyme that's occurring on the other side. So what I ended up doing for this was one-sided the murders, the victory one-sided. One-sided the arrogance, the fear one-sided. One-sided the widows, the unwidowed one-sided, and so on. So you're kind of getting both the repetition and you're getting those end rhymes as well. So something like that. While not being exactly true to the syntax of the original, it's still getting some of the rhythms there.
Thank you.
So much for that. I enjoyed you reading your work. So next question is from Lee. By the way, congratulations, Lee, because he's getting his English novel translated to Marathi.
Oh, wow.
And his question is, he says that he's terrified. So his question is, do you have any insights from an author's perspective, an author who does not speak the translation language, how to ensure the manuscript stays up to the snuff?
Sorry. Sorry, I missed the last few
Okay.
sentences there. How to ensure.
how to ensure the manuscript stays up to snuff?
Um, I mean, there's no magic formula there. You work on it, some more, you keep it aside, you work on it some more, you keep it aside, you work on it some more. And hopefully you get a good team behind you at the publishers. You get a good editor, a good copy editor, a good developmental editor, and they
No,
come in with inputs.
I think he's asking because he doesn't understand Marathi himself.
Mhm.
So how does he make sure that the translation language stays up?
Okay, that well, hmm. No, you can't. I think you just trust your translator. Uh,
Okay.
there's this hilarious story that Milan Kundera tells at the beginning of, I think, what was the fifth, or yeah, third or fifth translation of The Joke, his first novel, um, which somehow various translators kept getting completely wrong, at least to Kundera's mind. Um, and he tells the story of meeting, I think, was it a Latvian or Ukrainian or something translator of his, uh, who did not know a word of Czech, which is the language Kundera wrote in. And he asked the translator how he managed to translate then. And the translator pulls out a photograph of Kundera from his shirt pocket and says, "With my heart." So, yeah, you've got to trust that your Marathi translator's heart is in the right place. Maybe send him a picture of yours. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I'm guessing there will be a publishing house that is translating or publishing that translation, and maybe you have friends who can read Marathi, whom you might be able to enlist in this cause. Yeah, as an author, if you don't know the language, there's very little you can do. And even if you do know the language, if you don't have like a literary grasp of the language, if you're not a writer in Marathi, there's often a chance that you might end up doing more harm than good if you interfere there. So yeah, if the translator has questions, do answer. And maybe you can get someone who knows both your original work and who can read Marathi to have a look.
Radhika asks, how about novellas? If short stories don't sell, do you entertain proposals on novellas? There are some great ones in Tamil literature that she would like to translate.
Yeah, there's some great ones in many literatures, and novellas are very welcome. Prices become a very important when sales are abysmal. That is what I'm here for. I think as a literary publisher, I'm bringing prestige to the list. I'm doing the publishing house's corporate social responsibility, and bringing culture to readers, I guess. So prizes become important, and the thing to keep in mind for prizes is that novellas that are under 25,000 words long are often not eligible to be sent to any prizes. So something like, say, Gachar Gochar was, I think, expanded for the English edition. Some additional scenes were written in, which then made their way back into the Kannada eventually. So they got retranslated, or as it were.
Okay. Anjali wants to know, how do you think the current Indian literature is different from oldies like Premchand or Bengal masters and their translations?
Well,
That
every good piece of writing is responding to the times, whether directly or indirectly. So, and of course, there is a certain lag because it takes time to kind of work through ideas. So we're only now, I think, seeing 10 years into 10 years after 2014, for instance, how the politics of our country has been shaping us over the past 10 years. That's only now beginning to work its way into fiction. So anyway, the point I was trying to make was that yeah, every work responds to its times, I guess, or should in some manner, and yeah, that will change it, I guess.
okay. So Tamina asks, what are the baby steps one should take to attempt new forms?
Mm. Well, attempt them, I guess. There's no baby steps, just attempt them, see if they work.
Okay. Jyoti Vinod wants to know, if the author you want to translate is dead, how does one find the correct people to authorize translation? Also,
Uh,
how much literary license is appreciated in translated works?
Um, so the I think the safest and easiest thing to do is to approach the publisher of the latest edition in the original language. And if that is not an option, then try going to the estate if you can reach them somehow. I would suggest approaching the publisher first. Typically, they have all the language rights. And even if they don't, you often need an NOC, a no objection from them if you have to sign up with some other publisher for the translation. So I'd suggest going there first. And they would also have on file information about the heirs or the estate as well. So you can reach them through them. Yeah.
The second part was
Second part was?
how much how much literary license is appreciated in translated work?
Again, there's no one answer to this. It will depend on the work. It will depend on how you're approaching the translation. It's a constant negotiation, I guess. You have to figure out what reads well in English. For me, I keep that as the primary, I think, goal. It should be a transparent sort of reading. For me, as a reader, if I'm reading a translation, I don't want to be constantly thinking, okay, this is how it must have been in the original. Okay, this is what it must have been in the original, and that sort of reading experience is something I don't appreciate. And so, as a translator, I try not to have that. At the same time, there are things you can do in one language that maybe you can't do in another. And one of the most interesting things about translation is that it allows you to kind of try and bring those things into a different language. So sometimes you are kind of pushing at the edges of what a language can do or what is permitted in it. And I would hesitate to say that you just completely lose out on that as well. So it's a balance. Every text will have a different sort of balance. Every translator will have a different comfort level on what they think works for them.
So one last question. We are really running short on time. So Arupam Maiti's question is, after translation work is taken up by a publisher, is the translator paid for the translation other than the royalties from the books sold?
So typically, what happens in India is translators and authors are both on a royalty sharing basis. So authors and translators will split both the royalties and the advance on royalties equally. That is what we recommend. That is what the usual practice is. It's a very equitable arrangement. It also means that there's not a lot of money for anyone. Some publishers, well, in the West, publishers often do a one-time fee for translators rather than a royalty basis arrangement. I don't know if I'm connected anymore. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we could hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so in the West, it's often a one-time fee kind of arrangement. So what happens is, say, and I think people have spoken about this, for instance, when Moyan was translated, the translator got what, maybe $1,000 or something as a one-time fee. And then, of course, a few years down the line, he goes and wins the Nobel. And suddenly, what could have been like millions of dollars in royalties end up not coming to the translator at all. There are some smaller presses, I think, especially in the UK, which have tried to come up with a combination method where there is a small percentage of the royalties that goes to the translator along with a one-time fee.
Okay.
But yeah, in the Indian context, it's almost always royalty sharing and advance sharing arrangement, and no upfront fee usually.
Okay. That was interesting. Thank you so much, Rahul, for your time today. I absolutely loved talking to you, and I particularly enjoyed you reading your work. Thank you for taking out the time for us. So
well, I hope it wasn't a waste for everyone, and yeah, well, all the best with all the writing that you're doing.
Thank you.